Welcome to Let's Unpack That. It's a podcast where we two college graduates reread the books we read in middle school and analyze them from literary and socio-political perspectives. I'm Lydia.
And I'm Nina. And I think you kind of stumbled over graduates. It sounded like you tried to say graduates and then grad students at the same time.
Well, we're not grad students, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
Although I do relate to the memes.
Mm-hmm. I think if we ever decide to get a master's degree, we should just submit this as like an oral thesis. Like, here it is. This is our work.
We've done enough research over the past however long.
At this point. In fact, I think I've put more research into this than I did. I think I've probably put more research into this podcast than I did researching anything in college. So,
I mean, we're certainly doing it more often than I had to write papers.
We're doing it more often, and I'm more physically present, that I'm able to actually connect the dots instead of just mindlessly going through a fog and saying, that kind of makes sense. I'll put that down. I'm actually awake enough to absorb the information.
Except tonight. It's Friday and it's late.
Yeah, I think we should quit our jobs and just do full-time podcasting. What do you say?
No, I just got this one.
No. Okay, fine. Yeah, send us money if you support us making podcasts full-time, please and thank you.
I don't know. I think the first $500 is going to have to go to Dylan.
Yeah, Shout out to Dylan.
Anyway, today we are talking about chapters 5 and 6 of The Hunger Games.
And we just want to go ahead and put a sensitivity warning on this podcast. We are going to be talking about some stuff that may be potentially triggering. So if you are sensitive to topics such as sexual abuse and trauma, sexual assault, anything like that, please consider not listening to this episode. We are going to be talking about it quite a bit, so that is our sensitivity warning.
We don't want to make anyone uncomfortable who doesn't have to be uncomfortable. Some discomfort is necessary in order to learn new things and to grow in certain ways, but being triggered is not one of those ways. So, fair warning. If
you are sensitive to such content, that will be discussed at length in this podcast.
Yeah.
And we will forgive you this one time for not listening to us.
Yes. All right, ready for chapter 5?
As I'll ever be. Let me open my bubbly rosé first.
Oh.
There we go. We're ready.
Okay, so in chapter 5, they just arrived at the Capitol. Katniss gets scrubbed and sheared and poked and shaven and everything by the stylist's assistants until she is absolutely hairless and clean. Except they don't touch the braids that her mom did, which means they didn't wash her hair, which I found a little bit weird.
Well, and also, how good were those braids? Because I know if I sleep in my hair with my hair in braids, it's everywhere by the morning. So this is 2 days after the fact.
Yeah.
How good? How good is her mother at this hair?
Must have been really good. So then Katniss meets Cinna, her stylist, a surprisingly humble Capitol resident. He doesn't dress or act like other people. He's not as froofy or as bright and what is the word?
He's not as ostentatious.
Yes.
He's a little bit more subtle. Yeah.
Yes. He's a lot more subtle. So he prepares her for the chariot parade. Flash forward, during the parade, Katniss and Peeta are all dressed in chic black and set on fire with fake flames, and they thoroughly impress everyone in the Capitol and draw a lot more attention than the other tributes. And they hold hands as their chariot drives through the parade route, and the parade ends at the training center where they will train for the next however long before they enter the arena. So Peeta compliments Katniss on her flames, and Katniss is flattered for a second before she remembers that no, she can't get close to Peeta because he'll try to kill her soon. And that is chapter 5.
I think Cinna is one of those characters that definitely deserves to have his own book about his beginnings. I love him. I think he's great. I want to know how he came to be. He says one of my favorite lines in the entire book in this chapter. On page 65, when he's watching Katniss eat after they essentially had her little consultation, he says, "How despicable we must seem to you." And that just really shows an awareness of the situation that either the other Capitol citizens choose not to show or are incapable of acknowledging. which I think is great. And I want to know exactly how he came to be, how he started having these different thoughts of thinking, hey, maybe what we're doing is wrong. Because by all accounts, he was a capital citizen. He would have been raised the same way the rest of Katniss's stylists were raised, the way the rest of the citizens within the capital were raised. And yet somehow he has this rogue thought of maybe, just maybe, this is a shitty idea. We should promote that. Susan Collins, if you want to write another book, I want to know about Cinna. Thank you.
Yeah,
this has been a plug.
He is definitely more self-aware and more socially and politically aware especially than Effie outwardly seems to be. It's kind of a shame that we never hear Effie's internal monologue, because we have no idea if she has deeper thoughts. From Katniss's point of view, she doesn't, and nobody in the capital does. And that's what makes Cinna different, is that he actually thinks for himself rather than just going with everything and enjoying the pleasures of life while not paying attention to the suffering. Have you seen all of the Hunger Games movies? I've seen the first two.
Oh, okay.
So I'm pretty sure that he gets executed, doesn't he?
Spoiler alert, he dies. But I was thinking more of Effie's character, so they portray her in the movie when she actually wasn't in the third book much, but I think it's a great take on her character. So if you want to know more about her, I think the last two movies, they're not great, but I quite like what they did with Effie's character and brought her back to the forefront. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I want to say she has a bit of a character arc, but we wouldn't see that as much as we would see Katniss's character arc. And of course, the rest of the capital is just one conglomerate, is just one entity, and we never see their individuality aside from a few people. But also we're exposed to more, like, the idea of more rebels in the capital. Like, later we're going to talk about the Avoxes and the girl Avox who Katniss saw running away from the capital, running toward District 13. So there is a way in these societies, in these totalitarian and oppressive and seemingly nothing's wrong societies, for people to form their own thoughts and to rebel against the system that is all they've been taught. And I think that just goes to show the resilience of the human mind, the ability to not just give in to whatever we're conditioned to think, but to actually think outside the box that we're born into and that we're taught to always think inside.
Right.
So that's not at all what we wanted to talk about for chapter 5.
But it's great. It's fine. And oh God, there's so much. There's actually a couple of coworkers I was speaking to today. Hi guys, if you're listening, thanks. I told them about just the podcast that we do, and I said, the second season we just like so much better because we sound so much smarter. But there's literally so much that we could tear apart within the Hunger Games without really ripping into the storytelling. I think we did with Twilight, but there's just so much. Like, we could literally spend hours unpacking this on Let's Unpack That, going chapter by chapter. And we've tossed around the idea of doing an episode a chapter, because it's like, God.
For now, instead, though, every episode is just going to be an hour instead of 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the sponsors and the impending, I don't want to say threat, but the need to impress sponsors and to play everything in favor of the sponsors to get them. Sponsors are, as Haymitch had said in a couple of chapters earlier in the train, sponsors are what can save your life in the arena. And every tribute goes into the games knowing this, knowing that there are certain people that they have to impress because those people, if they like them, will choose to save their lives. One of the ways that those sponsors end up being coerced into liking the tributes, or just end up deciding that they like the tributes, is the sexualization of the contestants. Even though they're literally all children, the prettier and the sexier contestants get sponsors, and the plainer ones, the ones who don't make that kind of impression, tend to not. So let's discuss a little bit of why. I dove into the darkness of the internet and fake sociology, trying to find any proven scientific correlation between beauty and intelligence or beauty and survivability, and it is all bullshit, based on mostly Eurocentric beauty standards and racism. There's a lot of that.
What? What?
Also a lot of misogyny.
Never heard of that.
Yeah. I'm not dumber because my brain is smaller than the average man's. I'm just more wrinkles.
A smaller human.
More wrinkles.
Yes.
So, long story short, pretty people aren't more likely to survive in the games. That's not why these sponsors are betting on them.
Yeah.
So, why?
I liken it all to the way the peacocks are. You see with birds, those who have the brightest colors are the ones that attract the most mates for whatever reason. It's something innate. There's something linked to the brain of the bird that thinks this kind of aesthetic appearance is going to produce some kind of successful offspring. And it's in that same way. I think it goes down to a very basic genetic code of survival and producing the strongest offspring and trying to decipher what's going to succeed. And in that way, it's been blown up to the point of now we worship those who are quote unquote beautiful by whatever society standards are.
And yet we adhere to that without it being proven that being prettier produces better offspring or produces smarter offspring or anything. In animals, that makes sense.
It's true.
They have to be colorful to attract attention, but in humans, it doesn't translate.
I don't think it's true. Think about when you were back in school. The kids who were wealthier, prettier, usually had more money to do those things. They had the better clothes, or they could afford tutors and not have to work after school jobs. So they aren't necessarily smarter, but they have the resources to get ahead or meet the curve. It's like they have the ability to make themselves prettier, smarter, blah, 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 because of this monetary value, which I think also plays into it a little bit. It's why money is found to be an attractive asset, because then you get to be smarter, quote unquote, prettier, quote unquote, because you can use more of your resources to achieve it. And I think that's kind of the same way here, where if the tributes are pretty, they get shit sent to them. They will win. Mm-hmm. And it also ties into the fact that District 1 and 2 have their fighting academies. None of the other poor districts could imagine doing this. So those children are bred on their sex appeal almost. They're raised to be like this sexualized killer. Are they necessarily better? Maybe not. Maybe. But they are given a chance to be better because of their looks and their appeal. And, I think it all falls under that same thing. Sex sells, whether or not it's highly inappropriate, which if you ask anyone who works for law enforcement who has ever booked a pedophile into prison, that age doesn't matter when it comes to those sorts of things. Sex sells, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And it's not hard to imagine that the resurgence of this idea could arise from the Capitol.
If I'm understanding you correctly, going back to Districts 1 and 2, Districts 1 and 2 would be kind of like the equivalent of the rich kids who have the tutors and who have the fancy clothes and who have everything that is set them up to get ahead in life. And everybody else who doesn't have that, Districts 3 through 12, could potentially reach that level, could potentially, be billionaires. It's what we're all told, the American dream, but is a lot less likely because they're not starting out with the same advantages.
Right, exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. This whole thing made me think of, is there an analogous thing in our lives today where we root for the prettiest person before even seeing their talents, before even seeing them in action or how they act or how they talk or anything? Is there a situation where we root for the prettiest person? Mm-hmm. And I thought of The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, which led me to asking some people some questions about The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, the answers to which I really never was interested in finding out. So I asked the most notorious tweeters in our friend group, who are the cause of me having permanently muted the words bachelor and bachelorette. I asked Rochelle and Lexi.
Yes. Shout out to you too. Love you.
Yeah. And basically Lexi told me that while the network would never say it, you definitely have to be conventionally attractive to get on the show in the first place. And so before the seasons, before anybody has heard anything about any part of the show, fans base their judgments on each of the contestants on the short bios and pictures that the network provides. And then as the season progresses, judgments change with the producer's manipulation of what's going on and when. And then at the end, the tell-all is live and gives an update on the relationship after the season ended. But while the season is filming, the season exists in a vacuum. They're completely cut off from the entire world. So it's kind of... Geez, I have a list of media that's kind of similar to and might have inspired the Hunger Games, and like The Bachelor qualifies for that list because you have the beginning based on photos and districts. Those are the defining characteristics of tributes at the beginning. And then you see them train some. They get a score that adds to the judgment qualities. And then the games are manipulated by the producers, by the game makers, to deliberately change the public's judgments. And all of that is going on in a vacuum, in the arena. They're disconnected from the world. They don't know how people are viewing them. They just know who's dead. And then after, you have the interview with Caesar Flickerin. So it's not an exact match. I mean, I know that The
Really
Bachelor and The Bachelorette can be brutal like, we can be brutal in our judgments of people on the show. And a lot of that is based on production and the manipulation and editing. I mean, it's not as gruesome as having kids kill each other. And of course, everybody on that show is an adult. But it's kind of similar, I thought.
It all just ties together into this idea of image, gaining wealth, or some kind of favoritism. And it all just kind of loops back in on itself in like a very dirty knot, I think. It's hard to put into words how it does, but it you just kind of see it through the cracks of just, it all kind of comes together.
Yeah, like if you are pretty, you deserve love, you deserve life, you deserve plenty of food, like all of this deserving based on an image that is not completely accurate.
Yeah, and they're more likely to get some kind of gain by, I mean, you think we always see it with like the multi-billionaires who are like 60 years old and have like these 20-year-old girlfriends who are super pretty. It's like they're the ones that get chosen, and then suddenly they have, oh my God, no, look, he's dead, and there's no prenup. Wow, crazy how that happened. And it just, it all kind of ties together.
Also, this isn't to say that you have to be pretty to get ahead in life, or that you have to use your physical image to get ahead, or that certain image like types will fall behind. The previous example, like anybody can do anything, but it's the likelihood. Like the likelihood of a regular person like Katniss getting on The Bachelor, zilch.
Exactly.
And yet, she's defying the odds.
She's pretty, but she doesn't know it. That's why she's beautiful.
She's beautiful on the inside.
Well, while we're on the topic of parading children in front of cameras and parading people in front of cameras, I really dove into the themes of sexual assault, violence, and sex trafficking within Panem. Because I think this starts to lay down just the very hints of what's going on. And again, this is going to be a potentially very triggering topic. It is a sensitive topic. So if you have any of those sensitivities, please just go ahead and skip forward a little bit or skip the rest of the episode entirely. I don't actually know how long we're going to be talking about this, but
yeah, I'll write it in the show notes.
Okay, cool. Here's why I picked up on this. When we first start out in chapter 5, pages 61 and 62 describe the beauty stylists, quote unquote, cleaning and priming Katniss for her TV debut. She's entirely naked in this part of the book, and there's a sense that she has no say in what they're going to do to her. She is literally at her most vulnerable. She says, actually, my legs, arms, torso, underarms, and parts of my eyebrows have been stripped of the hair on my body, leaving me feeling like a plucked bird ready for roasting. My skin feels vulnerable. She feels like I hate to do this since we are recording a week before Thanksgiving, but she feels like a turkey ready to be roasted. She's likening this beauty makeover, and I put that in heavy quotations, quote, beauty makeover, as being prepared for slaughter. And then on page 62, her stylists leave and she's waiting for Cinna, but she doesn't feel like she can cover herself up because Cinna will only remove it. And in this book, you know, we're seeing Haymitch telling her in the previous chapters, hey, you need to be complicit with what they're going to do, and that's how you're going to survive. And that's very similar to how women used to be, and to an extent still are, taught to behave around people who are potentially going to exploit them. You know, when we were growing up, it was that, okay, like smile and be polite and, you know, just brush it off. Don't call attention to yourself or anything like that. And I think that narrative is changing just slowly but surely. But, you know, certainly I think we've all felt to the point where my chance of survival is based on how polite I can be and how much I can be complicit. You know, you don't make him angry or don't make someone else resent you. It's all very tied into that sort of, I'm going to do what they tell me, and that's how I'm going to survive this moment type of thing. And that's where Katniss is getting into. So all of this read, it just read very much like one of those moments where it's like, just smile and he won't, you know, do something to you. Do you catch the drift that I'm trying to say, you know?
Yeah, it's not being complicit. It's being, well, it's survival, first of all. It's a survival tactic. Submissive.
Submissive. That's the word. Submissive. Don't fight back because he'll just fight back harder, you know?
And that's how you end up getting killed.
I'm using feminine and masculine pronouns because I'm using this in a very, I guess I would say in the very heteronormative way that women have been taught to be very submissive to men in the past. But also, you know, this is absolutely possible with any kind of gender pairing. Even though I'm using heteronormative pronouns here, just know that that is not something that I believe is strictly adhering to something that happens between a man and a woman in terms of that kind of abuse of power. It can definitely happen in any kind of relationship.
All right. In this book, it is a heteronormative abuse of power, though. It's President Snow versus young Katniss.
So I really dove into the idea of, okay, what hints of sexual abuse do we find in the Hunger Games or sex trafficking or any kind of sexualization of the kids that we could pick up on that could link us to that kind of thought process? There was an article written by Kelly Oliver, and it's called Hunting Girls, and she examines popular culture's fixation on representing young women as predators and prey, and the implication that violence, especially sexual violence, is inevitable, perhaps even celebrated, and is part of a woman's maturity. I couldn't find the full article to read for free, but I was able to find on JSTOR a review of that work. It was just a couple pages long, and it essentially went over the big points within Kelly Oliver's essay, kind of highlighting the main points there, which I thought was good. But I really do want to read this full copy one of these days. And just for any background information, Kelly Oliver is an American philosopher specializing in feminism, political philosophy, and ethics. She is a W. Alton Jones Professor of Philosophy at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And that is all according to Wikipedia. Thank you. The review that I found was Hunting Girls, Sexual Violence from the Hunger Games to Campus Rape by Kelly Oliver. And that was a review that was done. It was published and is on JSTOR. It was done by Wendy Braun. And then she did that as a part of a studies in popular culture. The main point being that Oliver really focuses on young adult dystopian films, and one example of which was The Hunger Games. And in that article, she notes that it is an oppressive government that victimizes girls and young women as a form of entertainment, and they are able to return the physical violence and lead revolutions and can be interpreted as feminist revenge fantasies. It's the idea of we are putting these children out there to be these killers and these predators, but at the same time sexualizing them in a way that it's kind of this violent sexual fantasy creation of these kids. And in this instance, she's focusing on women, but we do see it with the men too.
Is this article saying that the feminist revenge fantasies are just the equal opposite of the male domination fantasies?
Right. It's like,
oh, wait. Remember how in the last book she kills Alma Coin? That's the feminist revenge fantasy.
Yeah.
And so the Hunger Games, the whole point of the series is that literally having a female president who's going to enact the same sort of violence is just as bad as having a President Snow who did the violence in the first place.
Right.
Revelations.
Amazing. I think the article is also just mainly focusing on, hey, this is blatantly sexualizing these girls by using violence, and using it as like she's like the dreamboat, tough but pretty girl. You know, it's like those video game characters that are like tiny waist, big tits, super pretty, and they run around and they're like, here's a gun that I can hold with my twig legs, and you know.
Yeah, speaking of the sexualization of the tributes, I don't think we've actually proven yet that the tributes are being sexualized, but here, I've got a few quotes, and if you don't think after this that it's about sex, then I don't know what to do for you. In chapter 4, Katniss says that she doesn't want a stylist who thinks, quote, nudity is the last word in fashion. And you know, while nudity can be tasteful, child nudity is not. That's not cool.
Quick pause. Did you see that graphic article about the photographer at Pepperdine who did pictures of women representing the 7 deadly sins, and they're all nude forms, but tastefully done. But the administration isn't letting her present those pictures in the same way that the rest of these senior art projects are being presented?
I'm not surprised. This happens every year.
Oh my God. I know, but you need to read that.
Last year it was somebody else's, and it was like too many cuss words or something.
Oh, Pepperdine.
Yep.
Anyway, sorry, continue.
So also in chapter 5, while discussing what Katniss is going to dress as for the parade, she mentions that one year the tributes from District 12 were completely naked with some black dust meant to be cold dust. Page 66. Also, later in the series, we learned that sex trafficking the tributes was not uncommon. In Catching Fire, we meet Finnick, who won the 65th Hunger Games and was later passed around forcibly by President Snow at age 14. And in this way, this aspect of the Hunger Games changes it from political to sexual. People get sexual gratification from watching children kill each other, and that is fucking disgusting.
Yes. And then I just had a thought. I wonder if Haymitch ever experienced similar things to Finnick, because he won the 50th Hunger Games. You know, we don't really have a lot of descriptions of how he looked when he was younger, but it's entirely possible that Haymitch was also potentially sexually exploited.
Yeah.
Which could connect the dots as to why he's an alcoholic. And so going off of that, in book 2, Finnick outright says that his body was sold. He was marketed as a male prostitute within the capital for wealthy patrons for winning the Hunger Games. But he's not the only one that we hear about. We actually found out that Joanna Mason, who plays a very significant role in the last 2 books, was also approached for prostitution by Snow, but she fought it. She said, no way in hell I'm doing that. When she continued to defy Snow, they killed her entire family, like literally wiped out her entire family. So she had no one left because she said she would not sell herself as a prostitute. So yes, the sexual exploitation is alive and well within the capital. And honestly, the tributes themselves have no bodily autonomy from the moment that they're drawn from the bowl in the reaping. They have no control over their physical state of being. And I don't think it's outrageous to think that some of the stylist teams, mentors, or other members of the behind-the-scenes teams could have taken advantage of these kids. You know, could they have been sold off prior to the games for sponsorship spaces and priority? I don't think it's I don't think it's outlandish to think about that. I read a thesis, actually, and reading this thesis, I now really want to go back to school, but this woman is a queen. The thesis was entirely on the Hunger Games. It was written in 2013. The ambiguity of Panem, capitalism, nationalism, and sexuality in Suzanne Collins' Hunger Games series. And that was written by Megan Ann Peters, and she graduated from the Minnesota State University of Mankato. Well done, Queen. You did great. I read almost this entire thesis, which is crazy because it was very long, but it was excellent. Highly recommended. And as always, our articles will be posted in the show notes. But one of the arguments that Peters makes here is that the feminist label is misplaced within the Hunger Games narratives because when you think back, it was originally seen as a very feminist novel. Like, oh, she's so strong and powerful and she can defeat the whole government and look at her go. But Peters is arguing potentially that label is misplaced. She questions to the extent to which Katniss is complicit or willing to participate in her own celebrity as both a sex icon and a revolutionist. So directly quoting here from the thesis, Peters writes, outside forces and characters dictate Katniss's sexual choices and her portrayal as a sexualized character, despite her personal resistance towards such behaviors. This is visible in the body modification she undergoes multiple times. The number of times Katniss and other characters, to a lesser degree, are described as naked. The love triangle between Katniss, Peeta, and Gale in the later books, and the sexual exploitation of victors in the capital and the poor citizens in the districts. And that's on page 38 of her thesis. She also goes on to say that during the pre-games interviews in the Capitol, Peeta declares his love for Katniss in front of both the studio and the national audiences, as the Hunger Games are mandatory viewing. Katniss was not informed of this public announcement ahead of time, nor did she know that Peeta had a romantic interest in her, so she was reasonably upset. And this is taking place from Hunger Games pages 130 to 135. When she expresses anger over Peeta's announcement, claiming that he made her look, quote, weak and like a, quote, fool, her concerns are not taken seriously. Haymitch responds, "He made you look desirable, and let's face it, you can use all the help you can get in that department." Because it is Katniss's mentor, Haymitch, and stylist, Cinna, encouraging her to be grateful for the advantage she gets via desirability, she is compelled to accept her sexualization. And a subtle coercion, according to sociologist Edwin Scher, exists whenever an individual feels pressured into undesired sexual activity. So if Katniss had refused a romantic pairing with Peeta, she would be neither as likable nor as protected, and therefore much more likely to die in the arena. And this exchange of sexuality for life, literally, is indicative of the non-consent and even exploitation. It is worth noting, too, that Katniss gains sponsors and thus has a better chance of survival because of the sexual and romantic, quote, desirability, rather than intelligence, craftiness, or pure deadliness, as some of the other tributes from the other districts do. And that was all a very long, direct quote from Peters there, but essentially outlining she did not choose to have this kind of image placed upon her, making her look literally desirable. Oh, we want her. We want to be with her. It really takes away some of her power there and how she's being portrayed.
Yeah, she too has to go along with it. As strong and as rebellious as she may be, she has no choice in certain situations. I also, reading this quote, realized how ironic it is that Peeta later says he wants people to see him as himself when he's in the arena. He doesn't want to die being not himself. And yet he doesn't let Katniss be herself. He forces his crush on her as this image of her, and that marks her throughout their time in the arena. And while it literally saves their lives and allows them both to come home alive because of public pressure to keep the couple together, it is still a shitty thing to do, to make someone else into something else in a lot of ways. And so it's not just the Capitol doing this. It's also the tributes that do this to each other and that manipulate each other, knowingly or unknowingly.
To play devil's advocate, though, it is also entirely possible that Peeta was trying to save Katniss by thinking, if I make her this icon, like, you know, in his mind, he was doing the right thing. So right. I don't know about you, but I'm not certainly turning around and say Peeta sucks, like he does for several reasons.
No,
but this might be taking it a little bit harshly, because I do believe his intention was to save her, or at least to give her some form of protection. And I don't even know if his intention when saying that he was in love with her was initially or was supposed to be intended sexually. I think that was taken on by the rest of the stylist team and Haymitch and Effie by saying, oh, look, she's desirable. They want her, playing on it a little bit.
Yeah. I think my point was more that knowingly or unknowingly, he increased their survivability by playing into what the Capitol wants. And that's not what Katniss wanted for herself.
Though I think you could argue in a way she wants to play into what the Capitol wants in terms of she's going to go in there and not make a target of herself. So she is playing along with the game, but she, I don't think, was prepared for the inherent sexuality of some of it, you know?
Right. Right. And also how much of this, like what happens right here, is what dictates the fact that she marries Peeta 10 years later.
Exactly.
It's like that manipulation doesn't end. That nuance doesn't end with the arena. It ends never. It follows them throughout their whole lives.
Yeah.
Just like the trauma he encountered in the Capitol has followed Finnick his whole life.
Exactly. You know what's interesting is that according to the thesis, Peters notes that Katniss is described as naked 20 times within the Hunger Games. And that's just the first book, 20 times. You have to wonder, is that truly a necessary detail to add? What's also interesting, I think, is that you find out early on that body modification is a huge thing in the Capitol. past the point of people having animalistic characteristics, dyeing their skin different colors, adjusting the way their teeth and their face look. Like, it's very face mod, body mod, all of it is very, very big within the Capitol. Everyone has some kind of distinctive mark about them. And body modification is a sign of control over your own body. Therefore, I think it's interesting to bring up the fact that the Capitol makes body modification, makes it a fashion to be highly modified, shows not only the absurdity and the gluttony over the people of Panem, but it shows a very stark contrast of the bodily autonomy that no one else in the country has, starkly contrasting to Katniss. She has no control over what she's about to go through and what clothes she's going to be put into, what makeup's going to be done to her. But the people in the Capitol are able to take their own bodies and dye it green or dye their hair purple or do some kind of modification to their face or their body. We see that later on in the third book. I think we have one of the characters who looks like a cat. I think we could really look into that a little bit further as to the contrast between the bodily autonomy between the people of the Capitol, who probably do it unknowingly, and then comparing that again to Katniss's state as being naked, vulnerable, and feeling like she's about to be slaughtered. I don't know. I picked up on that and almost just threw the book across the office, because to me, it's that symbolism there, first of all, is beautiful. But secondly, you could spend so much time breaking that down. I love it in a way that also makes me want to vomit.
Yeah, it's like there's a deeper level to everything that the Capitol people do, as superficial as it might seem. Like, fashion always has roots in something solid, even if on the outside it looks froofy and pointless. It always has cultural roots and is solidly ingrained.
Yeah. Collins does make a point to show that, at least by Katniss's point of view, that this is a problematic thing. So that's interesting as well. She does see the difference, I think, at least on an unconscious level.
Yeah.
It's interesting to note how Katniss says about her stylist team that they're so unlike people that she doesn't really mind the work that they're doing on her. But then Flavius says, "Now you almost look like a human being now," which I think is insane. You're going from having no bodily autonomy to being this modified picture of yourself, and to him, his opinion is, "Oh, that is what a human looks like. That's how you have control over yourself, and that's how you are deemed as a human." Meanwhile, Katniss, who is looking at these other three individuals who have full autonomy over themselves, who have dyed their hair, dyed their skin, made these changes to their body and their physical appearance, she thinks they're so unlike people. Just that contrast there. Oh, God, you could really do a lot with that too. It just really describes the difference in opinions there and how much it really does contrast with one another.
Yeah, it really defines the us versus them, because the people from the Capitol are not like the people from the districts, not just in how they act or how they talk, but in how they define themselves as humans. And it begs the question, what is a human being? Is a human being a person from a district? Is a human being a person from the Capitol? Is it a mix of the two? What system will promote the qualities in people that we can consider human and that we can consider good humans? That's a really interesting question, because is the best human possible a poor coal miner? Is the best person possible a fashionista with green skin? How do you reconcile those two beings as even the same species sometimes?
You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of the time in our past when slavery was legal and when the Constitution was being drafted after the Revolutionary War. African Americans, or I guess at that point they were just the Black people who were slaves, weren't considered fully human, and so they were counted as 3/5 of a human in terms of the voting power and the population density for creating the House of Representatives and essentially calculating the population of each state. They were put in as a lesser being, as a lesser form, and they had no bodily autonomy. They had no power over their own state of being because they were literally owned by slave owners. This, I don't know. This is kind of throwing me back for a loop, because I think that it's a very similar contrast as to how the districts themselves are, in a way, kind of enslaved to the Capitol. And they aren't necessarily seen as human by the people who are in the Capitol. And then they're killed for sport in front of them.
I'm going to have a lot more to say about slavery when we get to talking more about District 11 and Rue, because there are definitely race politics going on in Panem. There definitely is racism in Panem against Black people. It is not an accident that in the movie, all the people from District 11 are Black. That is not an accident in casting. And so there is still the remnant of American slavery in Panem. And I hesitate to compare a white cishet girl to a slave, but at the same time, sometimes that's what it takes to break through with these narratives. I completely understand like where you're coming from and why this comparison, like I think the comparison is valid. They very much are like slaves or like poorly paid factory workers who work for only the benefit of the capital and
And I'm looking purely at just their ability to change their own circumstance and their own power to change their own lives. That is only what I'm comparing, not necessarily really anything else.
The concept of personhood is very similar, but it's for very different reasons. So I think we'll definitely talk more about this later. Wow.
Ooh.
'Cause I
cannot wait.
Oh man, can I say, we'll talk more when I've had a chance to research.
I know. This is how I feel about the body modification and just like having this power over yourself. I'm like, oh my God, there's so much to talk about that I don't have words to talk about it.
Yeah. And it's like when you don't have a lot of power over your body, you do what you can, which in Katniss's case, I think is her braids. The one nice thing she could have was her braids, her nice hair. And if that was the only thing that was pretty about her, then so be it. But it was the control that she had. And so going from simple braids to the extreme of dyeing your entire body a different color is, I'm very confused right now.
I know.
It's a lot.
You know what else is a lot? I am drinking this rosé and it's definitely putting me to sleep.
Oh no.
Oh, I know. More so than I expected it to. I know. Do you want to talk about Cinna?
Yeah, let's talk about Cinna. A grounding force in a chaotic city. So far, I like Cinna.
Iconic, groundbreaking. I don't know. What's that meme?
But what really struck me here with Cinna is his emphasis on making sure that Katniss is recognizable in the arena. He's the one person who doesn't want to turn her into someone else. And so this is how he started the Girl on Fire brand. Combined with the bird of the Mockingjay, Katniss is like a phoenix rising from the ashes of the coal of her district.
Maybe Cinna and Madge are pen pals.
That would be fun. Also, Cinna asked for District 12.
Yes, I love that. It makes you wonder, how far in advance did Cinna plan for this? Did he ask for District 12 and go into the Hunger Games thinking a revolution would come from this district? And was he just biding his time and it happened to be that the first girl or the first tribute that came from District 12 was perfect? How much did he plan for this? You know,
that's the thing. When did they choose who gets what district? Is it before or after the reaping?
Well, she also mentioned that Cinna, with the new ones, they usually get District 12. And it seems like the stylists have been around for a while. So I can't help but think they're probably staying within the same districts for a bit.
Okay, so he might have just happened to get this one and he got a good one, a good year.
Right. He asked for District 12 and maybe he was biding his time until he found someone who could be that image of the revolution for him. Maybe so. Yeah.
Does Cinna end up having District 13 contacts?
He works with Plutarch Heavensbee, who ends up being the gamekeeper in Book 2, who has ties to District 13. Let me do some research.
Oh, I'm on the wiki already. Later revealed to be a supporter of the rebels in District 13. It's possible that Cinna was part of the same underground rebel network that Plutarch Heavensbee belonged to, though the novels give no specific indication.
It also says here that despite Cinna's death, his designs lived on. He had already designed her Mockingjay uniform, sketching it out in secret a few weeks before the start of 75th Hunger Games, knowing that there would be a war, and gave it to Plutarch Heavensbee.
Okay, so he was connected to the whole rebel thing. So there was an element of chance and an element of planning and choice and all that. Shall we do chapter 6?
Yeah, there is a chapter 6, isn't there?
Yeah, and we've been recording for an hour already.
So chapter 6, they arrive at the training center, where District 12 has the top floor penthouse. Woo woo. Katniss enjoys the elevator. Everything in her room is tech and fancy and fetch. The tribute stylists, Effie and Haymitch, all have dinner together to strategize. It's essentially a war meeting. During the meal, Katniss recognizes a girl serving them as someone she saw in the woods outside of District 12 and who got picked up by the peacekeepers. She's now an Avox, which means that she was a traitor, so they cut out her tongue. Peeta covers for Katniss after she tries talking to the girl. And Katniss and Peeta later go up to the roof to talk privately about this incident. Katniss tells him the story of meeting the Avox in the woods and watching the hovercraft carry the girl, and her companion, a boy, takes them away. It looks like the boy is killed at that moment, and the girl survives. So they had been running towards what we would later know to be the ruins of District 13, which is foreshadowing for the future books. But at the time, Katniss didn't know why they were running so far and how they had gotten as far as District 12. Even still, a while after the fact, Katniss still feels ashamed for not doing anything to help the girl. That's chapter 6. I was just going to say, I really need that hair detangler thing that she mentioned.
Yeah.
That she just needs to, like, put her hand on it and her hair is detangled. Like, God, can we put that into existence?
There's a lot of talk about District 13 in this chapter. It's the most we've found out so far. And we're already setting the foundation for later in the series, the revelation that District 13 still exists. She mentions that all they see of District 13 is pictures and the same video footage. And later she finds out that it's the same footage that they're repeating over and over, not taking new footage, because District 13 no longer looks like that. So before this point, we've focused mostly on the positive aspects of rebellion, on the rewards of rebellion. But the fact is that it comes with dire consequences. I mean, we all know how Les Mis ends. Yeah, sorry. Had to do it. We talked about the French Revolution before. So in Panem, the consequence for rebellion is mutilation or execution. Panem silences its enemies of the state in the most effective method short of execution by cutting out their tongues. There is no free speech in Panem. This is also why Peeta has to cover for Katniss on the roof when she says that she would run away if she could, just in case a hidden microphone picks something up. So by extension, if there's no free speech, there's also no due process of law. The Avoxes didn't get trials and weren't judged by juries of their peers. They were just silenced. And that led me to research elinguation, the cutting out of the tongue, practiced since ancient times and is rare but still happens today.
Wow. I never connected the dots between no free speech and then therefore didn't get trials and were judged by juries of the... Like, it makes obvious sense. That's clear that's what happened. But linking that all together, just noting that absence of free speech also predetermines an absence of the due process, which is crazy. Mm-hmm. So, next time someone tries to tell you that journalists suck and we shouldn't have journalists and people shouldn't write the things that they write, no, this is part of the due process of the law and how democracy is built.
You have to have non-biased information sources, doing the dirty work, doing the digging.
Can I tell you, so every morning when I get ready, I'm in the bathroom and I have my Google Mini home that I have going. And every morning when I'm doing my makeup, I listen to the news. And a couple of different news stations will put up little 5-minute blurbs of the latest headlines and just say, hey, here's what's going on in the impeachment, or here's what's going on in Israel, here's what's going on in blah, 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 blah. Just a short little it's essentially like listening to the news, just the quick segments of it in the morning, which is great. I love it. And it's probably one of my favorite parts of the morning. But I was very curious with everything going on right now with the impeachment. It's no secret that I am very much left-leaning, and my distaste and disdain and disgust for Fox News knows no bounds, because that is not journalism, people. It is not. But what was funny was the other day I was listening to just the news briefing by the New York Times, and they were talking about the impeachment, as everyone is. right now. And I was very curious to know, okay, I wonder what Fox News is saying on that side.
Uh-oh.
They didn't have much to say. They didn't have much to say other than like, oh, this testimony. I don't really think I retained much of what they said, but at the very end, kind of with their closing catchphrase is Americans listen to Fox News. And I can't tell you how much. It just bugs the hell out of me.
Doesn't mean Americans like Fox News. Doesn't mean Fox News is right.
I think they're implying, hey, if you like us, you listen to us because you believe us, I think is what they're saying.
And to be American is to trust Fox News.
Yes. Which is how I got here, because we were talking about journalism and shitty journalism and non-reliable sources. Anyway, that was a very long tangent. But anyway, apparently Americans listen to Fox News. Please continue about the cutting out of tongues.
Yes, the cutting out of tongues.
Yeah.
There's a long history, and I searched far and wide to find the history of it. And there's a lot of records of, torture, mostly people's tongues being pulled, not necessarily cut off. Also, I found out how to split your tongue in two. That was interesting.
Oh, yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, I was not looking for that information. Okay, so basically you pierce your tongue, and then it's like a gauge, but it's like shrinking around the remainder of your tongue. So gradually the hole gets wider and wider and splits your tongue.
Wow.
I won't leave that in the podcast. I just had to share it.
No, I think you should.
Okay. So anyway, there's a long history of women being elongated or having their tongues cut out. I'm not saying elongation anymore after this, I promise. But the most famous of these women is mythical, and it's the story of Philomela, whose story can be found in Ovid's Metamorphoses. And the story goes, this is an ancient Greek myth, that Philomela was raped by her brother-in-law, and then he cut out her tongue so that she wouldn't tell on him. So instead of speaking, she wove a message into a tapestry, sent it to her sister, and then her sister got so mad at her husband that she killed her son and fed him to her husband as his punishment for raping her sister.
That is like some Medea level shit there.
Yeah, the Greeks,
What is it with you people? I know, the Greeks.
The ancients.
Speaking of no power over their own physical sense, Jesus, it's a wonder they continued for so long. Apparently kids were getting killed back and forth. They had no say.
Yeah.
It's all a metaphor for Greek mythology.
It's all about teaching the adults a lesson. As long as the adults learn something, the children can suffer. Anyway, so I found a whole list of similar stories, some to do with sexual assault and others not. But the common theme is that these women had their tongues cut out so that they wouldn't speak out about something. And this is also a theme in the book, The Unspeakable Gender and Sexuality in Medieval Literature, 1000 to 1400 by Victoria Blood. And she talks about Philomela in a section called Taking the Words Out of Her Mouth. And so in Panem, in summary, yes, there are consequences for speaking out against the regime. But there's also a long history in our world of women speaking out despite being physically mutilated and physically silenced.
Which I think is interesting when you think back to chapter 2, when silence was used as a form of rebellion. That's a heavy moment. It's almost like turning the capital's biggest weapon against them by saying,
like, you can control our speech, but you can't control our silence.
Cannot control our silence, and turning it on its head. Oh, it's beautiful.
Chills.
Oh, feelings.
Chills,
Let's go back to school and write a thesis, Lydia.
Actually, we could just write an essay and publish it and not go back to school.
Oh, we could do that too. I realize this is the longest I've gone without sitting in a classroom in my entire life, which is crazy. Yeah. I was talking to Anthony the other day and I was like, oh my God, like my entire life the longest I spent out of a classroom was 3 months. For my entire life. It has been almost 2 years at this point. Mm-hmm. Who am I?
You just find new ways to stay in a classroom and to make a classroom for yourself. Make the world your classroom.
Which would be possible if I didn't work overtime.
Hey, I make you learn with this podcast.
I know. Hey, I chose to learn too at this moment, so I'm a willing volunteer.
Yes.
And I do have my LSAT book at work that I read through occasionally. And I dug out some of my old French textbooks because I really want to start speaking French again. And I signed up for Khan Academy, which is the like online learning thing, and started taking math classes.
Nice.
I'm dying.
I mean, you could always take a community college class for fun. It's not a big commitment.
I'm thinking about it. I kind of want to take a chemistry class.
Anything else about Chapter 6 and life in this totalitarian, gross capital?
Not really. Other than on page 79, when they mentioned that holding hands was just a touch of rebellion, it surprises Katniss to hear him, I think it was Haymitch, speak like that.
Yeah,
so the whole page in 79, it says, just a touch of rebellion, says Haymitch, very nice. And then Katniss thinks, rebellion? I have to think about that one a moment. But when I remember the other couples standing stiffly apart, never touching or acknowledging each other, as if their fellow tribute did not exist, as if the games had already begun, I know what Haymitch means. Presenting ourselves as not as adversaries, but as friends, has distinguished us as much as the fiery costumes. So she's still thinking in terms of survival, whereas Haymitch is already thinking, hey, you're rebelling against this system. And it just shows the degree to separation to which Katniss does not realize her path is being set forward as a rebellion and as a leader of that rebellion. In her side, she is still in it for the sake of surviving the games.
And if you think about it, it's ascending levels of unity. We had in Chapter 2 the unity of District 12's citizens. Here we have the unity of District 12's tributes. And now the district is a cohesive unit. It is definitely one unit in the capital's eyes as well as in everybody else's eyes. And that's the step towards uniting the rest of the districts, like in the second book where they escape with some of the tributes from other districts, to uniting all of them in overthrowing the capital.
And Peeta was never in the seam. He was one of the wealthy class. He was the baker's son. This is so
There's
good.
Another class unity, another class distinction erased by fire.
Oh, God.
And forged as a friendship.
Oh, God. It's so good. Oh,
I like this book.
I like this, too. I like it a lot. I mourn my college days because I was just so exhausted 100% of the time that I wasn't able to dive into subjects like this the way I can now and just speak openly about it. And I think that's what I miss about school is that I miss diving into subjects like this, but I also don't miss the fact that I would be diving into 4 subjects at a time and doing 3 different essays at one point, and where to the point where I was just spitting up words back on the page. This, doing a deep dive, I wish college had been more like it, but Nina misses school and wants to go back and learn things more. Okay, that's all.
Well, that is all for us this week. We will see you again in 2 weeks if we haven't died from exhaustion by that point. Thank you for listening. As always, you can find us on Twitter at Let's Unpack Pod, and wherever you're listening to this, you can find us on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and Stitcher.
Amazing! Next stop, Spotify.
Ooh.
Which would be badass. This episode has been brought to you by Nina slowly getting more and more tipsy as the night has gone on, because I didn't realize how little I had in my stomach, and now I am so ready to go to sleep.
Oh, goodness.
Thank you for listening, everybody. If you have any comments or any themes that you want to add to, or really anything, you just talk to us, please. Validate our existences. We're on Twitter. We'll talk to you. It's great. Shout out to our loyal fans. Micah, I found out my friend Cassidy also is a loyal listener to our podcast. So I love you, Cassidy. Hope you're doing well in London. Anthony, you are great. Hoping you are having a good time listening to me go off about all these things. And then if any of my coworkers have started listening to this podcast, I hope you enjoy this other side of my personality that I don't get to show in the office, because let me tell you, don't trust the girl in the office. She's a fake bitch.
Yeah, you can't have wine at work.
I know, and that's the saddest part of it all.
Yes. Also, thank you to our audio producer, Forehand, who graciously offered to improve our audio for this season, and we are forever grateful. Makes my life so much easier. Anyway, that is all for us today, and we will see you in 2 weeks. But for now, since I have a job now, I can say this. Let's get this bread.
Yeah!